What if America invades Venezuela and Russia actually wins? Let's start right there, because that sentence sounds insane. But geopolitics in 2025 is insane. When Donald Trump starts threatening Venezuela again, most people shrug and say, classic Trump, another headline, another tantrum. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't random. This isn't noise. This might be part of a much bigger global trade-off, and Russia could quietly come out ahead. Yeah, Russia, the country America has been sanctioning, isolating, and arming against in Ukraine. So how does a possible US intervention in Venezuela suddenly become good news for Moscow? Let's break it down calmly, clearly, and without rooting for anyone. On paper, Venezuela isn't a superpower, but it has the world's largest proven oil reserves, sits in the US's immediate neighborhood, and just happens to be politically aligned with Russia, China, and Iran. That makes it a pressure point. When Washington escalates threats against Caracas, sanctions, military posturing, oil demands, it's not just about Nicolas Maduro. It's about signaling power, about reminding the world who controls the Western Hemisphere. And that's exactly where Vladimir Putin starts paying close attention. Now here's the context most people miss. Trump's return to the White House in 2025 changed the temperature between Washington and Moscow. Not friendship, but transactional calm. U.S. military aid to Ukraine was reduced. Peace talks were initiated. Russia was quietly removed from the U.S. list of direct threats. Europe struggled to keep funding Ukraine on its own. From the Kremlin's perspective, this looks like momentum. So here's the question Russia is asking. Why blow up a working relationship with Trump over Venezuela, a country far from Russia's core interests? Short answer, they won't. Publicly, Russia will condemn any U.S. aggression. At the UN, diplomats will use phrases like neocolonialism, imperial exploitation, and illegal intervention. You'll hear speeches about sovereignty, oil theft, and international law. But privately, Moscow is calculating gains, because a U.S. military move against Venezuela does something extremely useful for Russia. If the United States openly uses military force to reshape politics in what it openly calls its backyard, Russia gains a powerful argument. If America can invade to protect its interests, why can't we? Suddenly, Russia's actions in Ukraine look less like an exception and more like a part of a global pattern. This argument resonates strongly in the global south, where memories of U.S. interventions are long and bitter. Russia doesn't need to win the moral debate, it just needs to blur it. Now add Europe to the equation. A U.S. war in Venezuela would strain transatlantic unity, deepen disagreements between Washington and EU capitals, increase domestic polarization inside the U.S. itself. From Moscow's view, this is strategic gold. A distracted, divided West is a negotiating partner, not an enforcer. Now here's another counter-initiative part. Even if Maduro's government collapses quickly, Russia doesn't lose much. Historically, Moscow adapts. It did so after regime changes in Iraq and Syria, sometimes quietly rebuilding ties with new governments that replaced former allies. Russian oil interests in Venezuela might take a hit short term, but sanctions already limit profits anyway. So the Kremlin's logic is brutally simple. Long war, US gets bogged down, Russia benefits. Quick regime change, moral symmetry still achieved. Either way, Ukraine becomes easier to negotiate on Russia's terms. Now imagine this scenario expands. If the US simultaneously pushes controversial ambitions, like renewed talk of control over Greenland, the narrative shifts even further. America no longer looks like the defender of the post-World War II order. It looks like a revisionist power, which is ironic because Russia sees itself as a conservative force trying to preserve that old border. From Moscow's perspective, the ideal outcome looks like this. US asserts dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Russia secures influence in the former Soviet space. Ukraine war ends largely on Russian terms. Global rules become less universal, more transactional. Not a return to the old world order, a new one. One where power matters more than principles, and deals matter more than declarations. So who wins? Not Venezuela's people, not Ukrainian civilians, not international law, but strategically, Russia may gain leverage, legitimacy, and negotiating power without firing a single shot in Latin America. And the US, it risks trading moral authority for short-term dominance. This isn't about cheering for America or Russia. It's about recognizing patterns. When great powers act without restraint, they don't just solve problems, they rewrite rules. And sometimes the country you think is losing is quietly doing the maths and realizing it might be winning. That's not ideology, that's geopolitics, and it doesn't care who you voted for.